So let's go ahead and get started. We will start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you could please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And staff, would you like to take roll call?
Sure. Commissioner Donaldson, Commissioner McLeod,
Here.
and Vice Chair Jennings.
Here. Okay. Are there any ex parte communications anyone would like to disclose?
None.
Neither. All right, thanks.
My microphone on?
It sounds like it.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to item number 4, consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the commission. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a commission member or member of the audience requests removal of the items from the consent calendar. We have one item on consent tonight, which is the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting minutes from October 9th, 2019. Are there any members of the commission who would like to pull that item for discussion?
I'm fine with.
No, I would, but I have to abstain on it because I was not at the meeting.
Okay, and any members of the audience want to talk about the minutes? Nope. Okay. Then we can take a motion. Would you like to?
What's the number?
Oh, here, I don't mind. I can go ahead.
I move to approve the consent calendar.
I will second. And it's just the two of us voting, so
Aye.
I believe the motion passes.
And I'll abstain.
Okay. Moving on to item number 5, public comment. This is the opportunity for folks to address the commission on items that are not on our agenda. Is there anyone here who would like to speak on an item not on the agenda tonight? Seeing no one, we will move on to item number 6, discussion and possible action on the following items. Item 6.1 is appeal of planning staff decision regarding new windows at 706 Gateway Avenue.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Once again, this is, I'll do a quick presentation on the appeal of the planning staff decision regarding new windows at 706 Gateview. Some background on the property. The subject property is a 4,032 square foot lot with a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1,584 square foot home built in 1940. The current property owners purchased the home in July 8th of this year. Earlier this month, a permit for 11 new windows replacements was attempted at the Community Development Department. Both building and planning staff informed the applicant that false divided light windows are not acceptable per the residential design guidelines. The applicant informed staff that the proposed windows, which are false divided light windows, were ordered ahead of obtaining the building permit due to long delivery time for the windows. Here's a street view of the property as it sits today. And project request. The applicant is appealing a planning staff decision regarding the proposed use of false divided light windows for 11 new windows. The Albany residential design guidelines prohibit such use of these windows. The basis of the appeal is due to the property owner's lack of familiarity with acceptable window types in the city of Albany. And here's just a photo of the existing windows on the home. And note they have the true mullions on the exterior of the glazing. And here's the windows that were ordered. These are Marvin windows with the grids between the panels of the glass. Analysis. Standard protocol for executing window replacement in the city of Albany includes the applicant reviewing the window handout, applying for a building permit, which should include a cut sheet of the proposed windows, the proposed window locations, and a site plan to illustrate the bedroom window egress. Staff then issues the building permit, and upon which the applicant can commence the installation and construction of said windows. And then lastly, they schedule a final inspection with our building inspector to verify compliance with both building and zoning regulations. Residential design guidelines. The residential design guidelines were prepared with guidance from the Planning and Zoning Commission. They were adopted by the City Council in February of last year. Pages 26 and 27 specifically detail the city's guidelines with regard to window treatments for single-family homes. And this is a quote from the page 26 of the guidelines. If using divided light windows, they must be true divided, meaning the mullion details must be on the exterior of the glazing. And then on the next page, it states faux divided light windows are not acceptable. And this is just a clip from our window handout that we provide on the city's website, and also a hard copy at the community development counter, which explicitly calls out what is acceptable and what is prohibited. Staff has not received any correspondences in regard to this appeal. And recommendation, staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission review and provide feedback to staff. Draft conditions of approval are provided should the commission decide to take action. And with that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff?
No.
Well, I guess my question, well, I already asked Chris one question before the hearing, which I'll just mention, which I was asking whether we had a site plan just showing where on the building the proposed window replacements are located, and I understand that staff does not have a copy of that. But the other question is, I am curious about, aside from the faux divided light issue, which I understand is the basis for staff's denial, do these meet, efficiency requirements?
Yeah. In general, they otherwise would comply. They're Marvin, which is a really quality product. They have a nice, the fiberglass exterior and the wood interior. So they are high-quality windows. This was just really the only issue.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
I guess one question, is it every window on the house, all?
I believe that's the case. There were 11 windows ordered in total.
So is the applicant here, and would you like to address the commission at all? Sure. Okay, great. If you could just come up to the microphone, please, and start by saying your name.
Hi. Hi. My name is Joe. My wife, Janet. My sister, Sunny, is also with us here. And my wife, Janet, and I purchased 706 Gateview a couple months ago. And, we're first-time home buyers. There are a lot of things with this house that are still in need of repair. We purchased these 11 windows, without knowing these guidelines, but the amount was close to $10,000, which are non-refundable at this point. They're custom measured and all that. It's not something we did intentionally, obviously, and if we knew about the guidelines, we would have never ordered them. That being said, these windows are in the same style that were originally there. The ones that are currently there are all single pane. Some have cracks. One is without a latch at this point. We can't even close it. It took, I want to say, 6 months for them to be shipped. Could be another 6 months if we have to get new windows to be shipped. That would be, looking into a December possible, maybe end of November, December installation. So, we're just hoping we can have some compassion here and some leniency, something we were unaware of, and we learn quickly, being first-time home buyers, that there's a lot of things that we're still learning here.
Thanks. Oh, sorry, just before you sit down, we might have a couple of questions.
Those are steel windows, the ones that you're taking out? Or is that what I'm seeing? Are they
I'm not 100% sure on that. They are metal, so yeah. I
metal
believe so.
frames, metal?
They look like the aluminum frame plate glass from
Looks
that
like
era.
steel or, yeah,
Or aluminum, or?
1950s, late 1960s.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And just another
question. Are those asbestos shingles? Are those?
I've been told they're cedar.
Oh, okay, they're painted. Okay, they look really regular. And then the plan is to take every window out completely and,
Yes.
yeah, so it's not a window that you sort
Not
of
a
fit
replacement,
inside the
right.
other frame. That wouldn't really be possible with those. Okay, that was my only questions.
I was just curious, so, as I indicated, I was trying to just visualize like where on the building all of these windows are located. So now I understand it's all of the windows,
Yes,
but
bedroom, yeah, common areas, all that.
can you talk about how many, and I do understand that it's down a hill, so not a lot of the house may be visible from the street, but I'm curious, like, as you're approaching the house from the front, like, how many of the windows are on that front facade?
So we live.
Oh, and sorry, is this picture from, like, approaching the front entrance?
Correct, so that
Okay.
is our front entrance, the window to our living room and front bedroom, but those actually aren't visible from the street. The ones that would be visible actually took the turnout of some if it would be.
Okay. Sorry, if you're going to talk, do you mind just coming up, just because this is being recorded? Thanks.
Yes. The two windows that are visible from the street are smaller windows that lead to two different bedrooms.
Okay,
They're smaller windows.
okay.
The photo that you just saw, those are a little bit more difficult to see from the street. And then the one that's facing the bedroom, this one, you definitely cannot see from the street.
Okay, but you see it as you're walking down to the house?
Yeah, pretty much when you approach the door, you're able to see it then.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I did just want to clarify on, so when did you buy the house? Just a couple months ago or
July?
July? Okay. So did you order the windows before you even bought the house?
No, he meant 6 weeks.
Oh, 6
Yeah, he
weeks,
accidentally
okay.
said-
That's 8 months.
Oh,
he
yeah,
said
okay.
months.
I was just trying to do the math, because 6 months sounded like a long time to me for the windows to get shipped, so, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Okay. Okay. Did you have any other questions for the appellant? Okay. All right. Feel free to go ahead and sit down. I will open it up for public comment in case there's anyone else here who would like to address the commission on this item. I don't think there is. So we will close public comment and bring it back to the commission for discussion.
I guess I can start. I don't have any problem granting this appeal at all. I don't think the city of Albany will be harmed by having these windows installed. House is on a cul-de-sac at the end of the street. There's not a lot of traffic there. The house is set back far. Our guidelines are actually guidelines. I think the staff did the right thing. I'm glad the staff is judicious about monitoring this, and I don't think the staff had any discretion on this to say, well, yeah, you can put those windows in. It's probably appropriate that it comes to an appeal for us, and I think I'm glad it comes to an appeal for us because we have the chance to say it's okay, and I think it's okay. I think that this is a hardship situation where they have innocently and without any, without trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes, in good faith, ordered new windows. They're quality windows, and I think they should be allowed to install them. So that's my position on it, and so I support the appeal.
Yes, I agree with everything Commissioner Donaldson said. You've been acting in good faith, even being here tonight. It's an act of good faith. The fact that you went even to get permits for this is, another sign of good faith. So I don't really have a problem with those windows. I mean, if you just took out the internal dividers, they would be perfectly 100% fine. So it's really just a minor aesthetic question. And I'm happy to support the appeal as well. And I looked at the house on Google Maps from the air, and it's really kind of set down below and out of the way. And no one will be harmed by this, by putting in these windows.
That's the way I feel.
So I'm happy to support it.
Well, I generally agree with my fellow commissioners. I think my main concern about granting the appeal is mostly the message it sends of, if you, the precedent-setting aspect of it. So, giving the message that people, and I know you weren't acting in bad faith, so don't take this to mean anything, but that people might just, go out and buy things for their house or, make decisions and then ask for us to approve it after the fact when we wouldn't have approved it in the first place. So I have some concerns about that. On the other hand, I do understand this is an honest mistake for what it's worth. Many years ago, before I was on this commission, we were doing energy efficiency upgrades in our house, installed windows. Didn't even occur to us that we were supposed to have permits. And then only, later when we went back to do a bigger remodel, were we told they were not legal, and so had to replace these perfectly good and energy efficient windows because they didn't meet egress requirements, et cetera. So I know that these kinds of mistakes happen. I think, my inclination would be to, to recommend that we try to, get the windows at least on the front facade of the house to meet our guidelines. And, understanding that might mean a couple of additional windows that would need to be purchased. I think that's kind of my ideal outcome here, but I do agree that no one is really being harmed in this particular circumstance, and really because of the particular location of this house and the lack of visibility and the fact that it is an overall upgrade, and the fact that I think my fellow commissioners are willing to just grant the appeal. I'm not going to put my foot down about requiring replacement or purchasing new windows for the front of the house. So. With that, I think I'm okay with it. And thank you for, I agree with Commissioner Donaldson that I think this was the right call, but hopefully this is a reasonable result.
I think it's a significant energy upgrade. I think it's a significant comfort upgrade for them. It's an investment in our housing stock. It's great to have new home buyers upgrading the house. So I think all that's good. I hear what you're saying about precedents, but we still have discretion. We can judge these on a case-by-case basis. And something seems egregious, and we can certainly vote against it in the future. And I kind of think they should just put them all in so it's one style of window for the whole house, and at least it's aesthetically continuous for what they're doing. So I would support them putting in all of the windows they've bought. So,
is there a motion?
Yes. I think you've prepared draft conditions so we could approve this, that is, grant the appeal and approve the project. So I will move then to, let's see, there's no number here, to grant the appeal of the planning staff decision regarding the new windows at 706 Gateview Avenue, and to approve the installation of the windows per the conditions of approval that the staff has prepared.
I'll second.
Okay?
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion passes.
You're
You
good?
can use your windows. Thank you. All right, moving on to item 6-2. This is amendment to Chapter 2024 Development Standards of the Municipal Code, establishing all electric development standards for new construction.
Are you going to,
You're,
You have
I was going to,
yeah, you're on.
but you're on that computer.
Try moving your mouse, Joe.
It's not working?
It's not working.
It's,
It's frozen? There you go.
shouldn't be, operator error there. Good evening, Commissioners. This is a opportunity for the Commission to make a recommendation to the City Council on establishing regulations requiring all electric infrastructure in new buildings in Albany. I'm here this evening with my colleagues, Lizzie Carrad and Bianca Huntner, who is Lizzie is our Sustainability Coordinator, and Bianca is our Civic Spark Fellow for the year. And they've both been helping me on the development of this regulation. Just to give you a quick overview, some of this I went over several weeks ago when you took action on the resolution of intention, but just to refresh your memory, the context for this is first and foremost to help achieve our climate action goals of reducing greenhouse gases generated in the city of Albany. We need to reduce significantly the amount of natural gas that's used in buildings. There are a lot of different ways to do this. This isn't the only answer, but this is a relatively easy first step that will help us achieve our long-term objectives. Other parts of the context for this is that there are cost-effective options increasingly available in the marketplace, and there are projects that are coming online. Commissioner McLeod included at your last meeting, and it was attached for your agenda item this evening, some examples of projects, some in the Bay Area and some elsewhere in the country that are using all-electric construction methodologies. And then this is an area of quite intense activity among cities in the Bay Area. I think Lizzie and Bianca could probably list off the number of cities that are preparing ordinances that are achieving this objective. There are basically two categories or two phases to project review. You know this, but just again to give you a little context, there's the planning phase, which is based on city regulations, and then there's the building permit phase, which is based on state building codes. And different cities are approaching this, the all electrification in different ways. Many cities are looking at the building code. The recommendation before you this evening is to use our planning code, and this is similar in nature to what the city of Berkeley has done. We've kind of reframed it a little bit differently to fit our codes and the way we approach planning projects, but it essentially achieves the same thing in the same mechanism. It would be a requirement of design review, which is a standard. Anytime there's a new building, it goes through a design review process, with the exception of ADUs. And from our perspective, one of the nice things about doing it through the planning code is we don't have to go through the processes and meet the criteria of the California Energy Commission if we were to modify the energy code portion of the building code. And again, City of Berkeley used this same approach. So basically, the code that has been drafted is adding a section to Section 2024 of the Planning and Zoning Code. This is a section that you use on a pretty regular basis where there are different requirements for different types of construction. This would add basically when you boil it all down, it's one sentence. It's highlighted there on the screen. It basically says you can't have natural gas. The ordinance does go on to have a couple provisions that are important in any sort of an ordinance. The first is the effective date. We've drafted it to be effective 30 days after the second reading, which is the standard time frame that we have for ordinances. But some cities, including Berkeley, when they adopted their ordinance in July, they extended the effective date. In their case, they adopted it in July and they extended it to January 2020 effective date. That gives people a little bit of breathing room for projects that might already be in development or in designed at some point, and a little bit of breathing room. We don't know of any reason to do that, but it's a possibility to do that if the commission wanted to make that recommendation. The issue of ADUs was discussed last time. We're in a regulatory environment where the state is telling us to cut back on regulations associated with accessory dwelling units. I have to say it's been very successful. The state actions have helped us legalize a lot of existing construction and encourage people to build a lot of ADUs. I think we hope to be able to achieve our housing element targets for the 8-year planning period that we're in right now, thanks in large part to ADUs. So We don't want to do anything that would create that would be perceived as creating barriers to ADUs. And as has been pointed out, we're not trying to say you have to use natural gas. If people investigate the cost benefits of electrification, they'll hopefully do it with or without any sort of regulation. We do intend to modify our ADU handouts to encourage people to look into electrification, and we're working on a web page that will be available so as people have a resource to go to for information about electrification of their buildings in general, but in particular this ADU issue. And then finally, every ordinance like this should have a little bit of a safety valve that provides some exemptions if there's something unique and unusual, that there's a hardship. If that were to be the case, you would review that request for an exemption, and the burden would be on the applicant to make that case to you. And if you decided to grant that exception, we would still require that the building be designed and constructed so it can be electrified easily later on down the line. Just to bring you up to date, the Climate Action Committee has discussed this at their meeting last week, and they took action to endorse the ordinance and recommended the City Council adoption of the ordinance. Just to give you an idea of what the Berkeley requirements are, these are just kind of pulling what I thought were the key sentences in their ordinance. They used a little bit different terminology, so they don't say design review, but their requirements apply to any planning application that requires a use permit or a zoning certificate. Again, they're making it clear, as we do, this is not an amendment to the California Energy Code, so we don't have to go through the state process. And it's an intense process of doing a feasibility study that uses the California Energy Commission methodology. You have to hire a consultant. You have to send it to the Energy Commission. There's a lot of back and forth. We think we can avoid that whole process. Then we can early on in the planning of a project, we can tell people, look, you need to plan for this. And with anything, it's nice to be able to tell people early in the process rather than late in the process after they've planned it, after they laid it out, after you've approved it, and then they realize, oh, I got to move stuff around because I can't put my water heater where I thought I could put it or something like that. Just to give you a context of where we are in this process, we've spent a lot of time working on it this month, and following your action, if it's this evening or at a future meeting, we would like to take it to City Council for final action. You reviewed the resolution of intention at your last meeting. The Climate Action Committee has discussed it, and your recommendation would be the final step before going to City Council. And then at some point soon, we'll have that webpage I mentioned. If you have questions about that, Bianca and Lizzie can help answer those questions. So in summary, we're asking for your action tonight to make a recommendation to the City Council, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Bond?
I do. I guess I have questions, and I'm just really sorry I missed the last meeting when this was discussed, I think. And maybe I missed the staff report as well at that time, but it seems to me that this is a pretty big deal. This is an important change to the zoning code. It's an action we're taking that not many other cities have taken. And it's, and it's going to, well, anyway, what I'm wondering about is why aren't there more pros and cons of going this way that are discussed in the staff report? In one place, it says, the only thing I have to go from is an estimated 40% of the CHG emissions in Albany result from natural gas combustion, okay? And then another place, it says 30%. But how will this save greenhouse gases? And how much will it cost to save the greenhouse gases? I really think this is the kind of thing, a kind of a policy decision that should have a cost-benefit kind of evaluation. And I don't, and some discussion in the staff report of why this is good policy. And I haven't seen it, and I didn't see it I've read, I'm familiar with the draft climate action plan, and I didn't see that in there either. Information about why Albany should do this, and why what are the benefits of Albany, and what are the I think it is it's a new requirement that is very specific, very strict, without any flexibility really, from the point of view of the developer, who may have other ideas, other ways they want to go, and it has the possibility of making housing more expensive of a development. Now, we're talking about doing it now. And, I guess it can be amended in future years as other regulations come down the pike. But why do we need to do it right now? Is the question I have. And there's nothing in the staff report. I don't have any information to go on in that regard. And so that's troublesome to me. I think this is an important decision. It's an important addition to the code, even though it's just one sentence. It's a real important addition and may have implications. And I think we're going off. I don't know how to say it, but I don't know. I think we're just jumping the gun on this. Looks like to me. I know you don't have another staff report prepared, and you probably don't have information that can answer any of my questions, but I am very disappointed, actually, that there isn't more analysis of some idea of pros and cons and a policy discussion as why this should be done now, this year. Anyway, those are my comments to the staff.
Okay, so before we go into the whole commission discussion, are there particular questions that you wanted Jeff to answer before we let him sit down?
Will you go over the effective date? This mention you made there,
So
Berkeley made it January 1st, well.
So they gave themselves
Ours will be January
5.5 months
later,
or
yeah,
something
okay.
so that applicants that were in the pipeline with the city, or even, in the pre-application phase, wouldn't be caught in the middle of their design process and having to make a change that might affect the layout of the building. So that gave them a little bit of breathing room. We don't have any reason to believe that would be a problem here, but it is one of the things that we could do that does give the community a little time to make an adjustment if you feel like that would be a particular concern of yours.
Okay. I guess another question I have is sort of related. I don't know when to say what here. But why did you think about, when you're working on this, could we provide some incentives to encourage developers in some way, benefits that they might receive if they went all electric, rather than just mandating it?
So we've had 2 conversations with developers, informal conversations. We get inquiries about things all the time. And in the recent conversations that we've had, we've identified this as a potential requirement on the horizon, and they've unequivocally said it's not a problem at all, that they're moving this direction anyhow.
Okay.
That they want to be responsive to the community, and it's not cheap to put in natural gas infrastructure. PG&E has
It's not cheap to do natural gas.
right, the natural gas infrastructure.
Yeah.
PG&E charges a lot. You've got a plumber putting in more infrastructure within the building, piping and so forth. So
But it's true for electric, isn't it, too?
yeah, but you're going to do electric one way or the other.
Yeah.
So you're just taking some of the plumber's work out of it. If we've got the sense that there would be more pushback from the development community, we probably would have done a little bit more in depth, but frankly, we haven't gotten the sense that that was a major issue. But if there's lots of work, there's lots of analysis out there that if the commission wished, we could bring back to you so you could see. And some of it is very technical, frankly.
I noticed, yeah.
But we can bring that to you if you feel like that would be helpful to your decision-making process.
Are there any other questions for?
Not right now.
Well, I just had a quick, maybe, I don't know if it's a question, but I did manage to read the Berkeley ordinance, and they didn't mention ADUs at all. They did in their draft ordinances, but if it doesn't come under the planning and zoning jurisdiction in terms of use permits, then it wouldn't apply. So I think that's where they just didn't mention it at all, but it kind of by default, it doesn't fall under the ordinance.
I believe that's how they, I'm not
Yeah,
I don't know the Berkeley code very well, and, but I believe, certainly in every city, ADUs should be a ministerial permit. Some cities push that a little harder than other cities. We're trying to stay consistent with what state laws has given us.
Not to get too far ahead, but there were 6 ADU bills that were passed in an effort to further streamline and promote the ministerial approval process.
and then I did read in Berkeley on their website that they are also proceeding with an electrical, or a sort of an all-electric reach code. But that will, that's an ongoing process. So they're planning on having both.
Yeah.
So if we did that, it would be a much different process and a much longer process. How long would it take to do a reach code approximately?
Well, we're working with East Bay Clean Energy, who is doing some of that technical analysis, and there may be some recommendations that come out of that that we could implement. But we like this as cleaner and simpler for a couple of different reasons, and we just felt like we could move a little bit more quickly.
Well, I appreciate that we can do this. Can do it right now, no further hoops to jump through. That's great. And as far as costs, there's no cost to the city for this ordinance. I don't see any cost to the city for
That's
this
correct.
ordinance. Zero cost, basically, to the city. I mean,
I don't know about
There's some, we'll spend some time working on it, certainly, but in
zero
terms of
cost.
out of pocket,
Once the ordinance is implemented, I mean, it's not like the city, it will cost the city any money to,
it doesn't require an amendment to our budget in order to
but
do
it's all
this.
just then part of the same budget that every project goes through, and it's not any additional cost to the city.
Well, along that line, Ian, let me ask Jeff a question that occurred to me when I was looking over the material. It looks to me like, and I'm not an expert in Title 24, but it looks to me like the Title 24 software, the calculations that engineers use all the time to figure out how to comply with Title 24 for energy efficiency does not include the kind of heat pumps and electric equipment that this would require. So looks like to me like there's a workaround that engineers are doing, and then they're presenting this data to the cities to say, well, here's our Title 24 calculations. It's not really done the way it's supposed to be done. It's done with a separate addendum to show that the electrical will meet them, because we're not using natural gas furnaces or space heating. And it occurs to me, well, is the City of Albany staff capable, or do you have the ability? How are you going to review these workarounds that are being done by other people? And in fact, another question is does that affect the Title 24 certification? And to the extent that it could lead to trouble with lenders or insurance companies or something like that, even liability down the line, because you're not using the standard approved Energy Commission, I think, Title 24 protocols.
So we're not Title 24.
Looked to me like staff work there.
We're not Title 24 experts. When we're in plan check phase with the building permit, we use outside consultants who review the the calculations that applicants submit to us.
Right.
And that's a very specialized field that is quite complex. And we're not proposing anything out of the ordinary for Title 24. We're not waiving the requirement to go through those calculations. If we got into a situation where our requirement was inconsistent with Title 24 requirements for some reason, and that this new software is coming out, I don't even know if it's out yet. With every code cycle, there's a new software that comes with it. So there may be some hiccups along the way, and we'll work that out with applicants, either by making adjustments with the Title 24 calculations, which there's some flexibility in that, or it's the hardship that we bring back to you, say they can't achieve the state requirements at the same time they meet our requirements, and then that would be a decision for the commission to have to sort out.
Okay.
We're hoping that and we would expect, we have no reason to believe that an all-electric building wouldn't meet the Title 24 requirements.
Jeff, I was just curious, on a less technical note, what staff's plans are to do outreach and, help publicize the new requirements, assuming that the city does act to adopt this ordinance.
Right. So just about everybody in town who's interested in doing this ends up having a conversation with Chris. And we have materials that he hands out to them or emails to them, and that will include a reference to information about an all-electric construction. That there are some resources that they ought to consider. And as I mentioned before, Bianca has been working on a web page. It's not up yet, but developing a web page of resources that we can refer people to. And she can give you more details about that if you're interested. That help people figure out what to do specifically with their projects.
But there's not a particular, active outreach campaign that's being planned right now? You kind of have to...
Actually, we're kind of in the very early stages. Maybe too early to say something, but we are planning to do some ADU community engagement and kind of would be the word, help facilitate people doing ADUs in the community and have some community engagement, different ways of doing community engagement in the next, 4 or 5, 6 months, something like that. So it's in very early stages, not really ready to talk about it, but that is in the back of our minds.
Okay. Thanks.
So just to clarify, now, you're proposing this to apply to new construction. So if someone comes in to add bedrooms to their home, then this would not be applicable in that situation?
That's correct.
Remodels, that sort of thing, yeah, okay.
That's another issue, and because we're primarily a built-out city, that may be something that we'll want to address at another time. That's a much more complicated issue.
Okay.
But we felt like with new construction, if you're starting from scratch and thinking about the layout of the building and how everything is coming in new, it should be pretty straightforward.
And it's not restricted to multifamily. So if someone wanted to come in with a new home, a new single-family residence, this would apply.
It would apply. It's drafted.
Okay, well, thank you. Let's open it up for public comment. Looks like we may have a couple folks who would like, you have speaker cards?
Speaker card,
Okay,
yeah.
great.
Preston Jordan.
Thanks. And I'm sure you know this, but we ask speakers to stick to 3 minutes if possible. Thank you.
My mind is well tuned to that time length by now after thousands of these comments. Thank you very much. When it goes to 2 minutes, and I sort of lose my thread. Thank you very much for taking this up. Thank you, staff, for bringing this forward. I would encourage you to ask that the findings include findings regarding public health and safety. Those are included in Berkeley's findings. The Morgan Hill City Council is voting on a similar ordinance change tonight. It's included in their findings. I think that will strengthen the case for it. So there is research out there that's cited in it's actually done at my workplace, and it's cited in the Berkeley staff report regarding indoor air pollution, that there is no EPA guidance for indoor air pollution or requirement for indoor air pollution, but research has found that indoor air pollution is worse than the standards for outdoor air quality due to natural gas stoves. So that's one point. Natural gas, the presence of natural gas infrastructure can foment more fires after an earthquake. A year and a half ago, ABAG and the USGS put out a scenario study of a 7 magnitude earthquake on the Hayward Fault and projected a bit less than 1/8 of the residences in Albany would likely burn up due to fires after the earthquake. So to the extent that we can reduce that conflagration, we'll actually have more of a city afterwards. So there are other good reasons that should be in the record and that will strengthen the record for banning natural gas in new construction. And again, I would encourage that those be included. To my knowledge, I reviewed the last 3 years of planning and zoning agendas at the beginning of this year and deciding whether to pursue this or not, to see what's going on. As you're probably aware, there's been an uptick in applications. It's not large in relative numbers to Albany, but it's large in terms of absolute change compared to previous years, and that's, I presume, due to the reduction in parking requirements off-street. Turns out my neighbor across the street is building the first new house in Albany in 3 years and perhaps longer. And I was fortunate to go out to beers with him on Saturday, and this subject came up. And he said that they were going to put in natural gas. PG&E projected it would be $10,000 to put in a line. And so they put the down payment in, and PG&E came back with an estimate of $32,000 once they'd done the engineering. And that's because he said once they touch the line, they have to go all the way back to the main and replace the whole thing. So they're keeping their existing house in the back as an ADU, and they wanted a new line for both. So they said, forget that, we're going all electric, that's cheaper. So they were doing it purely as a financial decision. So I see this as really a means to educate people and push developers to look at what is actually cheaper instead of just doing what they've always done before. We've seen some of that already. And I will also point out there's a question of whether to do it at building permit or design review. Morgan Hill is going to do it at building permit. So I would encourage you to look at that as well to capture more projects.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Dan Johnson.
Hi, thank you. I'm Dan Johnson. Thank you, staff, for putting this together. I'm a licensed architect, and I design heating, cooling, hot water systems in buildings for a living. I am a Title 24 expert. That's my day job. January, I would like to address some of the questions that you brought up earlier and also offer myself as a resource if you want to learn more about this in the future. January 1st is the effective date in Berkeley because that's the date that the building codes change at a state level, and this is already on the radar of most building professionals. So that's the reason for that coincidence. There are 11 cities, if Morgan Hill flips tonight, that will already be doing this. So it's not that Albany is taking the lead, Albany is actually just riding this train. Keeping the gas out of new construction is actually cheaper than putting it in. And I worked with affordable multifamily developers, and they would love to get the gas out of their buildings. For a variety of reasons, it's still in there, but they're always trying to, it's been their aim for a long time in order to make their buildings cheaper and more affordable to more people. I consult to people who are designing ADUs. They would rather have electric water heating because they're already bringing electricity to that ADU. Trenching gas to it is just a safety hazard, and it's more cost. Why is this all coming up now? California's pushed gas forever. That was unfortunate. What's happened now is that our grid has become amazingly cleaner compared to what it was, the electric grid, in the last 10 years. Something like 35% of electricity now is renewably generated. We have state policy taking that to 100% by 2045. Heat pumps just in the last 10 years have also increased in efficiency, 300 to 400% efficient on electricity. You're paying for a more expensive fuel, but you're getting 4 times as much heat out of it as you would burning gas. So we can go into all those facts later if you want. Most of the pollution we generate from our homes that is impacting the climate right now is from burning gas for heat. And there's really no reason to do that anymore. We have the technology, we have a clean grid. PG&E would probably support this ordinance. There was someone from PG&E spoke in favor of Berkeley's ordinance. They don't want it either. They are happy to not have the stranded assets, to not grow this problem that they have by extending it to new buildings. If we're worried about cooking, Consumer Reports in their most recent work, 6 out of their top 10 stoves were electric. Right, so hands down there. Finally, I want to echo what Preston said. Even if we weren't in a climate crisis right now, the health and safety reasons alone would justify this. So a report said that kids have a 40% higher chance of asthma growing up in a house with gas cooking. We can make a real impact here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Nope. All right, thanks. We will close the public comment on this and bring it back for commission discussion. Anyone go for it?
Sure, I'll start. I'm extremely happy to support this proposal, this new ordinance, for multiple reasons. It's made possible really by the fact that heat pump technology is dramatically, radically improved in the last 5 to 10 years. Like one of the speakers mentioned, you get an efficiency factor of about 4 to 5 out of the new technology. That is what's making this technically feasible. From what I've seen from examples around the Bay Area, around the state, there are many, many multifamily housing projects that are going all electric. And they're doing it right now, and they're doing it within the current energy code, and it's working. The bottom line is we have to stop burning fossil fuels in order to combat global warming and reduce greenhouse gas production. And this is the best first step Albany can take right now. Very easy, easy to implement. It's easy to just remove that future gas burning from the equation entirely. I think that's the best part of it. Once gas infrastructure is in place, it's in place for the next 30, 50, 100 years, or until the state of California and PG&E decide to get out of the gas business altogether. And the state may go that way. I think it's trending that way. The CEC is also looking at that. California Energy Commission is also doing analyses based on removing gas from our buildings entirely. You know, we may just come up to a hard line where there will be no more gas allowed to be used in California in 20 years. And my impression from PG&E is that they have an aging, you know, risk-prone gas infrastructure, and that they may be willing to pare it back in an orderly fashion. They may even be willing to start buying customers out and providing funds for that. Funds for this will come from many sources, but PG&E itself may want to get out of the gas business. They have tremendous liabilities, such as San Bruno, the explosion. So Southern California Edison had a huge catastrophic methane release. So I'm all for this. Like the speaker said, there are many great reasons. You get better indoor air quality. You're not burning gas inside a house. There are public health issues for that. In terms of fires, it's entirely true that once a fire starts in an earthquake with a gas pipeline, the only way to shut it off is to go find the nearest control valve somewhere in the street, turn that off. So in a major disaster, we're going to have gas fires burning from these gas lines all over the Bay Area, potentially. It's a huge problem. The other notes I have here, natural gas is methane. It's one of the most potent greenhouse gases out there. Even as it's produced, as it's shipped, as it gets to your house, it leaks. It leaks into the atmosphere. The production releases, the mining production, et cetera, releases methane into the air. The pipelines leak methane. Your gas meter is designed to leak. It has maybe a 1% leakage rate. So just by its very nature, this is a very polluting greenhouse gas producing technology. It's basically an old technology, and we should get out of the business of promoting or using gas. I mentioned pipeline explosions. The other point I'd like to make is cooking. Induction cooktops are more efficient. They're actually, you have more control than gas. High-end restaurants are going that way. French Laundry has gone to induction cooktops. Alinea in Chicago, one of the best restaurants in the country, has gone to induction cooktop cooking. There are examples in the handout I provided to staff of all commercial all-electric kitchens, so they are also feasible. The technology is there. It all works. So I'm not really concerned about that aspect of it either. I guess I would like to conclude by just saying that all electric buildings can be 100% net zero with solar PV and green electricity that's locally available to the east, through the East Bay community energy supply. If you have a gas burning building, it will never be net zero, it will never be carbon free, and it will always be polluting. So I think we want to eliminate natural gas use in our buildings, and this is a great first step. So I'm 100% in favor of this proposal, and I'm in favor of adopting it by January 1st to coincide with the new California codes, so that everybody's on the same page. They're expecting new code changes, so they'll be looking out for new code changes, and I think it'd be a great point to implement it.
Okay. Well, I'm skeptical about what we're doing here, and I don't have enough. Your comments are very helpful to me, actually, and I'm learning things as you go forward. But that's the only evidence I have. I think the record we have in front of us is really weak in supporting this, and I was disappointed in the climate action plan that it didn't have more information that would help convince us why we should go this way as well. It looked like, well, there was, some sort of consensus on doing it, so we got to do it. And I'd like to know more. I'd like to know more of the evidence and why this is. You're asking me to vote sort of here to say, well, yeah, we're going to abandon our gas infrastructure in a way. That's where we're heading on this. And I know I'm a little skeptical about how that's going to go. And that seems like a big thing to ask. Maybe PG&E is willing to walk away from it. Somehow I doubt it. So some of my comments are, I'd like to see more evidence in the record to back this up, and I'm not going to support it the way it is. I'd like to know more about, how much of the natural gas we're using in Albany goes to space heating, how much goes to cooking, how much goes to other uses, and because maybe we should be considering a hybrid approach with electric for space heating, spas, other large items, but allowing gas for cooking. And what about decorative fireplaces? This commission over the years has been encouraging the applicants to come to us for home additions to get rid of their wood fireplace and put in electric inserts. And there's building code benefits for that. Your chimney doesn't have to be so high. It's safer, whatever. And now what this looks like to me is this is an effective ban on fireplaces in any new building in Albany. That's never been discussed. And do we really want to do that? And if this goes to remodels, which seems to be the way it's moving, then are we going to tell people that you got to go back to wood? You can't have gas fireplaces because we're not allowing gas? I think that's an issue that I just have not seen any discussion about at all, and tells me that this whole ordinance is premature right here, and that these things should be thought out. I'm in favor of delaying this action by a year or two while these things get worked out. I'd like to see some calculations in the staff report about really how much greenhouse gas reduction we might get if a hypothetical project is being approved here and that we're required to go electric, and compare that with what the cost of that project might be. Don has said, well, a lot of architects are want to go electric because they don't have to put in gas lines and deal with gas costs. That may be true, but there's nothing in the record that to say that, to let me know that, and I don't have, so I'm being asked to vote on something here that, just take it on faith, we're right, I don't like that. What are the costs and benefits of this? Will this add to housing cost, or will it reduce the housing costs? That's really an important consideration in this day and age when there's such a shortage of housing, and the pressure is on everybody to build more housing and to reduce the barriers, the requirements, the permitting requirements for housing. And here we're adding another permitting requirement, and that bothers me. I'm wondering, does the California Public Utility Commission or the California Energy Commission have policies in place to address the CNG emissions from the use of natural gas? And do those policies encourage the individual cities to ban the use? And if not, then why don't we wait for them to do that? Or what do we know that they don't know if they aren't on board with this? 11 cities, you say, are doing this. That's good, but we're acting individually here, and we're just a small city. Let's take some guidance from the. I wish there was some evidence in the record saying, yeah, the California Energy Commission thinks this is a good way to go. The CPUC thinks this is a good way to go, and agreed. My understanding from newspapers is that there's a surplus of natural gas in the United States right now. That tells me that the price of natural gas is likely to plummet if there is a surplus. So are we going against that demand curve? The price of electricity is going to go up if we go off natural gas. The demand will go up anyway. And why don't we have any evidence in front of us talking about those trade-offs and is electricity going to be very expensive in 10 years? And will PG&E be wanting to sell us gobs of natural gas? Right now, I think the United States is exporting natural gas in big ships overseas to Japan and other places. We have a lot of it. I just don't know what's going on there, and I think that if we're going to make this decision, we should have some information about that. My question to Jeff is, what about incentives? Should we be putting, what should we be doing incentives here instead of just a ban? I don't like the idea of a ban. And if we have incentives, that would be a very positive thing that the City of Albany can do. And have we thought about that? And I think I'm in favor of giving housing developers and builders in this day and age more flexibility rather than less flexibility. And that's exactly what the state is forcing us to do with respect to ADUs and some other types of construction, that they're forcing flexibility on property owners, and taking regulation away from the cities so that more housing can be built. And this goes against that trend, and it bothers me. I'm commented on my concerns about the Title 24 work regulations and the workaround when my comments to Jeff. I mentioned fireplaces. I guess that's all I have to say. And my conclusion is this is not ready for prime time. We should not be doing this at this time. And I don't think we have an adequate staff report and adequate information in the record to make a reasoned evaluation here that would support this change in the ordinance. And I think we should postpone this either until we have more information and we have a good record to say, yes, there's good reasons why this should be done in this city at this time, and or delay it for a year until the whole trend sort of filters out and people have more experience on that. I don't think delaying this would not have any significant impact effectively. We might have 1 or 2 developments in the next year, maybe 3 in the next year that would come under this ordinance. And what kind of greenhouse gas savings are we going to get from 1 or 2 or maybe 3 small developments at the most? It's a small number of units. It won't make any, it's small enough to not make any difference. And if we have more experience, the state has more experience, the authorities and the experts that know more than we do are better informed about this. And the policymakers at the state level have more information on this, then we can do better. We can make a better decision. So anyway, that's my standing on it, and I think it's premature right now to move this.
So I disagree about the record. I think that over the past year, or 6 months, this is the third time we have considered and had conversations about this issue. And although I wouldn't expect you to go back and dig through the prior staff reports and transcripts and meeting minutes from the prior 2 meetings, I think that overall the record is clear in support of all of the policy reasons that Commissioner McLeod laid out for moving forward on this ordinance, which, despite what, I think you have some valid questions and concerns about, the specifics and the details. But as you, Commissioner Donaldson, pointed out at the end, this is something that, in its current form is a fairly modest change that's going to affect, again, in its current form, a small number of projects. And I don't think this is a sky is falling kind of situation. I do think it's a great opportunity to make a step in the right direction towards getting us off of natural gas infrastructure. And I will say I was skeptical about, although I supported the broad policy goals behind this, I was skeptical when it first came to us about whether it was the right time for Albany to be moving in this direction and whether it would really have that much effect. But over the 3 discussions that we have had about this and the entirety of the record, I am now confident that this is a good step. That said, I guess skip to the bottom line, I think, what I would be, well, it may not surprise you to know, have detailed comments on some of the text of the proposed ordinance, because this is the first time we've actually seen that text. And so, again, skipping to the end, I think what I would like to suggest tonight, based on Commissioner Donaldson's comments, the fact that a couple of our fellow commissioners aren't here, is, potentially providing feedback on some of the specifics of that ordinance and continuing this or bringing it back one more time. So, we can talk about whether there's support to do that. But I guess if you'll indulge me just to talk about some of the particular comments, and there's nothing too significant, but first off, I do agree with Mr. Jordan's comment. I think it would be helpful for the record that eventually goes to the City Council to have proposed findings about health and safety reasons for taking this step. So I would encourage staff to draft something addressing that issue. On the definitions proposed in the ordinance, I think this is generally fine. With respect to the definition of newly constructed building, I was curious if there was any effort to to harmonize this with other definitions that may already exist in either the zoning code or the building code, and that's a genuine question. I didn't check to see if there are other definitions we could be pulling from, but I think if the city is already using, particular definitions about, what is truly ground up construction versus a major remodel, I think it would be really helpful to reflect that consistent terminology to make clear what we're talking about. With respect to the prohibition on natural gas infrastructure in newly constructed buildings, I think that is straightforward enough, but it it actually raised a question for me whether, if there is existing underground natural gas infrastructure and you're doing new ground-up construction on the site, do you have to remove what's already there? I don't know. I think it's just something to consider, and we might want to clarify that. On section, well, whatever the subsection is E, and talking about exemptions, I think that I would strike number 2, projects that have an active planning application on or before the effective date, simply because we've already covered that in subsection B1, and I think it could be confusing to have overlapping and duplicative provisions. This is a super tiny nit, but on subsection 4, this is line 10, you need an opening quote around design review. Subsection F3, so I guess this is line 22 or 23. The commission shall review the information supplied by the applicant. You need an "and" before "may request additional information." I would also, well, I'll give the specific text comments first and then tell you the overall comment on this section, but I think this is line 25. If the Planning and Zoning Commission recommends that it is a hardship or infeasible for the applicant, I don't think we're really recommending that it is a hardship. I think we're recommending a finding that it's a hardship. So I would suggest adding that clarification. I think this subsection 3 and 4 together are a little confusing because it's not totally clear what the Planning and Zoning Commission's, what the bottom line is. So most of 3 indicates that Planning and Zoning is making a recommendation, but then at the top of page 6, line 1, it says the commission may grant an exemption, but then 4 says the granting of the exemption shall be made by the overall project decision-making authority. So I think we need to reconcile those 2 provisions. And then the other somewhat substantive comment on the hardship and infeasibility exemption, which I agree that such an exemption should exist, and I think I also agree that we probably don't want to get into trying to anticipate all of the potential reasons that a person could apply for a hardship or infeasibility finding. So I don't want to load this up with a bunch of, criteria or findings that have to be made. But I think it would be helpful to have some kind of, guardrails around what counts as a hardship or infeasibility exemption. And, even if it's as simple as saying something like, that you need to make a finding that a strict application of the prohibition would interfere with achieving other goals of the general plan or the city's climate action plan. I think we want to give some direction about what we would expect applicants to show us in order to support that kind of exemption. Subsection, I guess this is still F5, denial of exemption. I think we want to rephrase, so currently it says if the Planning and Zoning Commission determines that it is possible for the applicant to fully meet the requirements of this chapter. That's not really the test. And we haven't set up, again, a criteria about what it really means to have a hardship, and we're not actually asking them to demonstrate that it is impossible. So I would reword that to say something like, if the commission determines that the applicant has not met the burden of showing a hardship or infeasibility, they shall so notify the applicant. But just change that wording around. And then finally, with respect to the effective date, I think, again, given the modest nature of what we're really talking about here. And the support that I think we have heard from most of the commission as this has moved forward, I support it going into effect soon. In practical terms, that's probably not going to be before the first of the year, but I was going to suggest that we, just add a clarification that it would go into effect 30 days after the date of its posting or January 1st of 2020, whichever is later. So that, again, in practical terms, that might not make a difference given where we are in the year, but I thought it would be a helpful clarification. Okay, so that's what I've got. And again, I think what I'm inclined to do tonight would be to recommend continuance of this item, but it's not entirely up to me.
I'll move continuation.
Well, can we discuss a little more, please?
Okay.
I would support incorporating all your suggestions as far as legal language and some of the definitions and things like that. And I think it would be a good idea to have something about public health and safety. I think that's a big component of this. I think that's why it's in the planning code, or one of the justifications for having it in the planning code. I would support adopting it with Megan's suggested changes now, but it doesn't sound like we have a consensus for that tonight. And I think it wouldn't be a bad idea for our other commissioners to weigh in on this, in all fairness. And getting back to cost, I've been looking at a number of not public housing, but housing projects. And generally speaking, from what I've been reading in the literature, it's cheaper to go all electric. The equipment's there now that will work, all electric equipment. And it really is not putting in that trenching, pipes, meters, PG&E costs, plumbing costs, another pipe system through the building, then you've got flues, you've got greater ventilation requirements. So that's a whole building cost that doesn't have to go in there when it can all be done with one system and one electrical system. So the savings on the gas piping can be put towards better electrical equipment and better comfort and safety for the project. So, indoor air, as we're building tighter buildings, indoor air quality becomes really, really important. So if you're burning, if you're cooking with a stove or you've got some sort of gas furnace, the buildings are tighter, so that gas and those noxious fumes stay in the building more likely. There's greater risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. There are a lot of things that really, point to getting gas out of the buildings. I'm an architect and a builder, and I've designed and built 3 all-electric projects in the last couple of years. And we found it was cheaper. For a new house, it was cheaper not to run the gas line, and we put that into electrical equipment and insulation. And then we're getting these houses net zero ready. So it's kind of a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. And to get to net zero, which I think is the goal, so, we're not polluting the environment, we're not contributing to greenhouse gas production, we're trying to limit global warming because, frankly, this is a runaway catastrophe, what we've got going right now, and it all stems from burning fossil fuels. So I think it's important for us as a city to get ahead of this, to join the other cities that are early adopters and push this forward on a statewide level. So I'm all for this, and I would be happy to continue, incorporate the language, maybe address some of Commissioner Donaldson's concerns. Maybe we can bring back some more information that would be in support of this in terms of housing and costs and things like that. So fine with taking it to the next meeting. And, at that point, I don't think it's going to slow it down a whole lot, but, maybe still could happen by January 1st or not, I don't know. But That's it, thank you.
Sorry, I realized I had one more just discrete point, which is that and I think you're already working on this, but I did want to just encourage staff to take, proactive measures to try to educate the community that this is a step we're taking. And I know you're good about doing that in general with planning efforts, but glad to know the website is going up. I think this is something that will have a lot of interest, and I think a lot of people, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people react, kind of maybe don't completely embrace it at first, but I do think that it's something that can be explained and that the city can help advocate for on the front end. I also agree we should be looking at incentives especially to bring along existing remodels, but that's, I think, a topic for another day. So just wanted to encourage staff to continue looking into those
What Ian
issues.
says is right, then the incentives would be the way to go. It should be then the incentives, we do incentives and then it just happens. If Ian's right about it being cheaper, more efficient, and all the architects are really jumping on this, then that's great.
Well, all the architects are not, and some people
That's what
like
I'm
to
worried
cut
about. There
corners.
might be, and I say, there might be a reason why all the architects are not.
Well-
And I really am, I don't know. My job here, I guess, is to be somewhat skeptical. Now, I also have to say, I'm skeptical about the indoor air quality thing. I've been, all my life, 70-some years here, I've been, cooking with gas, I think, except, no, not really. But most of my life, and had gas in the home, and now suddenly it's unhealthy.
Well, we all know
maybe,
people who have
whatever.
smoked for decades too and didn't get
First I've heard
cancer,
of it,
but.
First I've heard of it being a real serious health hazard, so, anyway.
Okay. Do we have support for continuing?
I am.
Okay.
I'd be happy to move to continuation. I think it's also a good idea that the full commission is here for this, so, sure, I'll move continuation of, is this an item number?
It's
Amendments to
6-2.
Chapter 2024, Development Standards Establishing All Electric Requirements in New Buildings.
I will second.
And I add that we incorporate Commissioner Jennings' suggestions for the wording
Yes, of course, thank you.
and
Thank you.
public health and safety's wording into the proposal as well.
Okay. And all in favor of continuance?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that item is closed. We will move on to 6-3, another set of code amendments. This is Chapter 2032 signs of the Albany Municipal Code.
We do have a presentation on this. There we go. Okay. Unlike the last item, this is actually an existing code that we have that has not been modernized since 1978. So this is one where we are overdue for an update to come into compliance with case law through the Supreme Court from a few years ago. So before you tonight is the final draft that we have right now, and if you conclude through your discussion and review of this, our next step would be to take this to the council. As I mentioned, our current ordinance dates back to 1978 and has no distinctions on content neutrality or commercial and non-commercial signage. Based on the vintage of this ordinance, our city attorney has advised us to simply scrap what we have currently and start all over again. And so what you have before you tonight is a more expansive version of sign regulations that comply with federal law and are much more contemporary in nature. The previous ordinance was 12 pages. This is 19, so we have expanded it a fair amount. And just to refresh your memory, in 2015, there was a Supreme Court decision. It was a case of Reed v. the Town of Gilbert, Arizona, which made distinctions on signage based on sign content. And what this ruling requires is that a jurisdiction effectively cannot regulate the content. In that case, it was church signage and real estate signage, political signage, so on by content type. We can no longer do that. So we have to have commercial and non-commercial non-commercial, and then objective standards for signage. So you last looked at this in April of this year, and you had a resolution of intention, which was adopted. The commission at that time also provided us with some general direction on refinement and steps for proceeding. So we've incorporated all of your feedback into the draft that is before you tonight. And just kind of a big picture snapshot, we do have policies within our general plan, as well as the council adopted strategic plan to update the sign ordinance and to make it more compliant and contemporary. So the initial draft provided you with purpose, general regulations, evaluation standards, more expansive definitions with corresponding graphics, and some preliminary parameters around non-commercial signage during the election period. So the city can still regulate time and place, which is how we cannot call it political signage, but we can define it by time, and that's its own thing. So we've expanded that with the draft to include message neutrality, the review for authority, sign area requirements by zoning district, sign area requirements by sign type, and then general requirement for master sign program. And so we've prepared this table which breaks down the different zoning districts and denotes what is permitted or conditionally allowed through Planning and Zoning Commission review, and then of course what is prohibited by within certain zoning districts. Similarly, we have changed the allowable sign area. Our current 1978 ordinance is pretty generous. I mean, theoretically, you could have up to 300 square feet of signage on San Pablo for a particular business and 200 square feet on Solano. Most businesses don't want to invest that much money in signage, so it's sort of regulated itself, under different circumstances. But we have, with your direction, kind of brought this more in line to really what is appropriate signage and more context appropriate. One of the big takeaways from our last discussion was to make sure that signage does not obscure architectural features of a building, and so we've put that throughout this latest version of the ordinance. We haven't received correspondence on the latest draft. It is exempt from CEQA. And with that, we have a draft ordinance for you, and certainly welcome any comments that you would have for refinement to the ordinance. This, as I said, is a draft, so we're happy to make any modifications as the commission sees appropriate.
Thank you. And just for anyone watching at home or the video, I will say that there's no one in attendance who might want to make public comment. So I'm going to just go ahead and skip over the public comment part, call that closed, and then we can just have a discussion. Okay, thanks.
Good way to do it. I have a question for staff, though. Or?
Yeah, go for it. I figured we could just have more of a back and forth this way.
So, Ann, go back to I have one substantive issue I want to talk about. I think only one. Go that table right there.
Yes.
So SPC. Did we direct that there would be no monument signs?
Yes.
And no stand-up signs?
Yes.
In SPC?
That was, yeah, and actually my original version actually had it, and it was a point from the last discussion to take monument signs out. We do have, UC Village has a monument sign, Albany Town Center has a monument sign. In general, it's not.
Don't they have a master sign plan?
Program, yeah.
Okay, well, here's what I found, and this bothers me. I'm thinking about it, and I think the old San Pablo design guidelines did allow monument signs and freestanding signs. And I was remembering the issue we had with the Shell station here. They wanted a sign as big as the Arco sign, and we said you have to have a monument sign. And I know they appealed that decision to the city council. They fought it hard. They may have taken it to court, I don't recall, but that was a big issue. So anyway, we have a lot of existing monument and freestanding signs on San Pablo. And I think that we should change that prohibition to planning and zoning to be a PZ thing. And maybe I missed that the first time around. If so, I apologize. But I see biking down San Pablo the other night, Hill Gas has a freestanding sign, the Arco has a freestanding sign, the restaurant, the Patala restaurant there has a freestanding sign, full freestanding signs, those are existing. And monument signs, we have BevMo has one, the Shell Station has one, Kelly Moore across the street has one, and I would say that the sign on that Estrella used car dealer is kind of a monument sign. It's a crazy sign.
I wouldn't point to that one as an example. I've put
not. I mean,
the
it's
business on notice, it needs to come down.
Shouldn't be there. It should be an illegal sign. And then,
It's actually off-site signage. Their office is further down San Pablo Avenue, so they're not supposed to have signage
okay,
there.
well, that's another
Here
issue.
nor there.
And then I noticed the Subaru dealer has vacant lots where they park cars. They have signs in those that says, Albany, they still say Albany Ford Subaru. I mean, they haven't been updated, but if they come in to update those, what kind of signage are we going to allow them? So they're vacant lots where they use for customer parking. I don't know, the more I thought about it, I said, I think that monument signs and freestanding signs should be planning and zoning approvals rather than prohibition. And I really think that's going to be very important if any of our 3 gas stations change ownership or want to remodel or have to come to us for something. Because the signage, I mean, I suppose we'd love to have the gas station somewhere else, but signage for the gas stations is not an easy thing to do. To put it on the building, they will do that. They put it on the portico over the pumps, but they always say that's not enough, that's not enough. We've got to have visibility from the street. And I sympathize with that argument. I'd like us to be able to regulate those freestanding signs and/or monument signs. And I know we relied with the Shell Station, we relied on the San Pablo Avenue guidelines design plan, which called for monument signs in gas stations. So we gave them. Anyway, so that's my main comment on this. I thought I'd bring it up since you had that chart right on the screen there. So I may have some other smaller comments, but in the text, but that's the main thing. What other commissioners think about that, or whatever?
I would tend to agree that it would be good to have flexibility in those cases. There may be situations where it's appropriate to have a monument sign. I mean, it kind of implies a certain kind of development, often with the parking lot or something out in front, which is maybe in the evolution of San Pablo, we'll be building more towards the edge of the sidewalk. But, until that happens, which is maybe decades away, I think some flexibility would be appropriate.
I would agree with that as well.
Okay.
We'll be happy to make those changes.
And apologies if that's 180 degrees from what we told you the last time. I honestly don't remember.
No, I think
That
it's
all makes
fine.
sense.
I mean, I don't know that presently we have any other shopping centers that are in the pipeline, but I think it is good, where we've had recent approvals to not effectively make them non-conforming.
For the Sprout Center, we did a
Master sign program.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's a good way to go.
Yeah.
I like that way to go.
So I think overall, this is a really good draft. And I think I am generally in agreement with the policy direction of it. I do have text comments, which maybe I don't know if you have any substantive comments you want to.
Nothing
Talk through.
major. No, go ahead.
Okay.
So,
I'm sorry. I know
Yep.
this is not the most effective way to do this, but
that's the way to do it. Megan, I have a couple little things.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
And then, because I see you have a lot more ink on there than I do, and your analysis is usually really good on this, so I'll get my little ones out of the way.
sure, go for it.
And see what you have. On page 5, at the first paragraph, for clarification, so this talks about It's a definition of city property and public rights-of-way. And the second to last line, so city and property includes, that sentence there, all kinds of different things. After sidewalk, I would add parking strip,
Oh, right, okay.
just for clarification.
Sure.
So that could come up in the issue in the future, if when people put political signs or whatever else,
around
especially
public
political
parking
signs in the parking strip. I think that would be a good clarification. On page 14, I see I have a notice here. Under E, the exception should be 30 days. The word days seems to be missing.
Oh, yes.
See what I mean?
Sorry, which one were you?
Yes.
All right.
The version that you have,
Up to
that
30.
our city clerk caught that, so I've corrected
Okay.
it in mine.
No.
Oh, yeah, I had that too.
Oh, and then, Megan, I bet you have something on this too, but on C, size limitations on page 15, I had trouble with the second sentence there, beginning the aggregate area of all temporary non-commercial signs. What does that mean? And when you go down in the table below it, it says quantity of signage on private property, no limit. And it seems to me
Yeah, so
that
we,
should be 8 square feet.
so we actually, so I worked with the city clerk. She's had a lot of strong opinions about this. And so we actually revised, she and I worked together. So under C, we revised it, temporary non-commercial signage shall not exceed 4 square feet in area per sign. All temporary non-commercial signage displayed during the election period shall be placed and maintained on any parcel or real property in one ownership. So we simplified it.
So you got rid of this language about
Okay.
the aggregate area?
Yeah.
That's good. Sounds like that could work. Okay. And do I still have a reasonable comment on the no limit there on that table?
Well, so
Shouldn't
that's,
that be 8 square feet, or what is the difference here between section 085, let's see, .085?
so that was another point where we went back and forth. The current code has a restriction that limits a private property owner to no more than 16 square feet of signage during an election period on their property, so that would effectively be 4 campaign signs.
That's right.
That's not something that we want to regulate. It certainly, we can't enforce it. If someone, next election, we'll have a presidential cycle, we'll have congressional races, we'll have state and other, ballot measures. We don't want to restrict the signage that a resident may want to put on their property.
Yeah, so, okay, so we're going to say if you want to put up 15 election signs,
Yeah.
you could.
But only during
I'm okay
that
with
election.
But only during that
As long as you take
period.
them down within the appropriate
Right.
time period.
We're talking about 15 distinct election signs.
We're not regulating the content.
Whatever
We're just saying the
content.
time
could be
period in which
all
it can be there.
One candidate or one issue, or, however many you want to put up.
Yeah, I think some of the thought was, on a 2,500 square foot lot, you're going to be physically confined with how much signage you can put up. But, there will be a lot of issues. It will be a big election. Of course, we always have state ballot measures. We have local issues that we have to vote on. So there is a lot to consider.
Fair enough, I think that, okay. So this is temporary non-commercial, okay. So that's, the no limit is there. That's, okay. Got it. Okay. I don't think I have anything more. Let me see. Oh, yeah, I do here. On page 16, there's a word missing here. Under 075, first line, designated a reviewing authority for something shall evaluate proposed signs.
We can strike out the 4. I think
Strike out the 4.
Yeah, the designated reviewing authority shall evaluate proposed signs for compliance with this
Got it.
chapter.
Okay. All right,
Good?
that's it.
Okay. Okay, so let's see. Starting on page 3, M, signage removal. This is actually just more a question. upon closure of a business, the signage shall be removed within 90 days of the date of closure. That seems like kind of a long time, but,
We can make it shorter.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't feel that strongly about it, but it
30
seemed like
days or
30
60
days would be
days.
reasonable.
Yeah. So you said 30 days?
I said 30, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Again, I don't feel strongly about it, but 90 days seemed like quite a long
It seems like a
tail.
long time.
Yeah.
I mean, in sort of a retail environment that starts
Okay.
looking like the kiss of death to a retail district if things stay on too long, yeah.
Right. This is sort of a structural comment, and I kind of had it in a couple places, that it seemed like the ordinance might benefit from just some reorganization to help it flow a little better. And, I thought the section on definitions, it might, this is really a stylistic and, subjective matter, but I thought it would make more sense for that to be moved up, and perhaps put it, either right before or after the section on regulatory scope.
Purpose, regulatory.
Yeah, because I think it makes sense to have purpose first,
then
and then I would say
definitions.
then definitions probably makes the most sense to me.
Yeah.
Just so you have the framework as you start getting into the, the substantive provisions. There's a definition in here for commercial mascot, and I didn't see that term used anywhere, so
Oh, yeah.
unless we're going to, I don't know. Then it never even occurred to me that you might need to regulate a person as a sign, which is an issue. But if we're not going to, if we don't have
We don't have a parameter.
provisions, then
Yeah.
we might just want to take that out.
No.
Yeah.
Under exempt sign, in the second line, it should say, so it currently says, but it not subject to a sign permit
It is not
is,
not subject to sign.
and I did think this was a little, well, I think never mind. It makes sense as you read on. I think that was it on the definitions, but one global comment I had was that now that, we've set up this great framework of definitions, but then I noticed that they aren't really consistently used throughout the ordinance when we're talking about that thing. So, like, for example, in section .035 on message neutrality, there are several references to commercial or non-commercial copy. I think the term that we have set up as a defined term is commercial message or non-commercial message. And so I think, if we mean something different than commercial or non-commercial message, we should clarify that. And if what we really mean is within that definition, we should use it.
Is that definition?
Yeah.
I agree.
I thought that the reference here in this subsection A to constitutionally protected non-commercial copy, I think we might want to just get rid of that. Like, it just seems, I think it's implied, right, that non-commercial messages that are allowed under this code are going to be constitutionally protected, but it just seemed a little loaded to me.
So just so I'm clear, so the
Neutrality.
I
section,
just would strike, I'm sorry, .35A.
Okay.
I would consider just striking the reference to constitutionally protected,
okay.
because it seems like it sets up an inquiry that, I don't know, we just might want to stay away from. So also on the issue about defined terms, so again, that's kind of a global comment, and I would suggest reading through this again with that sort of lens. But I noticed a few other instances. So under subsection B1, there's a reference to the total amount of signage. I think the term that we have defined is sign area, and we want to stick with that. And that one, I think, came up later as well. Moving on to section .045, signs exempt from permit. I had a couple questions here. So banners and window sign temporary are both listed on this table as exempt, but then on this list as exempt, but then on the table on page 18, those are both listed as signs that require a permit. So I don't necessarily have an opinion one way or the other about whether they should or should not require permits,
Oh, I see.
but I think we should clarify which it is.
It's banners, right?
Banners and window sign temporary. In .055, the heading is temporary non-commercial signs, but under subsection A, it starts off by saying temporary commercial signs.
Yeah.
So I think we need the non.
Fix that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I agree, I think I agree here. So what you're saying is they're exempt, but
Well,
then in the table, we require a permit.
Yeah. And so again, I think I don't actually have an opinion about whether they should be exempt or require permits.
Right.
I just haven't thought about it enough, but I think whatever we intend, we should clarify it. On .060, so there were a few references in here to signage as well, which I think we just want to say signs, because that's how we've defined the terms. The size limitations we already talked about. I thought that the list in section 065, it seemed a little, well, so looking at that list and the table in 075 and the table in 090, that list seemed a little superfluous and just a little confusing.
We can strike it.
Yeah.
It would make sense to take that out.
Okay. And I think if for some reason, if you think about it more and think that there's some reason to keep it, then I would make sure that it encompasses all the kinds of signs that are listed elsewhere. Because like I noticed that it doesn't include a wall sign,
Right.
for example. In section 070, let's see, I thought that, so in the middle of that paragraph, there's a sentence that says, if the original permit did not contain physical design elements and only the copy or graphic design on the display face is changed, a new or amended permit is not required. I think that's covering the same ground that was covered in section 035, message neutrality. And so I would just recommend striking that whole sentence and instead consider saying at the beginning of this paragraph, except as provided in section 2032-035, comma. So we can refer back to it without having the overlap. And then on section, let's see, the tables, the two tables, sorry, I think we may really only need one of these tables as well, because I think that all of the information covered in this first table is also reflected in the second table.
So you're talking about 075 and 090?
Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe just for, maybe there's a reason we want to also just communicate, here's the full list. So that's fine. I don't feel strongly about this either, but it just made me wonder what's the purpose of this this initial table. And if we do keep it, again, I thought there were a couple of discrepancies between this and the following table. So a couple of things that are listed on the table in 090, but are not listed in the table in 075 include temporary, or window sign temporary and banner. So again, those, the two that I mentioned before.
can I?
So I
Yeah,
think
please, please.
With regard to that, so window sign temporary, I think is handled by that footnote 2, at least for the R districts.
For the R districts,
And
yeah.
we might be able to do a footnote for banner as well, and that is, would have to say that the first 30 days are exempt, or if it's for 30 days, it's exempt. Do a footnote on that. And
Yeah,
then
maybe
if it's
so.
longer, then it requires a permit in these 3 districts.
Mhm.
And
That makes
I think that's
sense.
okay. I think that'd
Yeah.
be okay to have,
Yeah.
require a permit for banners that are going to stay up for a long time.
And can you just restate the time threshold for banners?
Pardon?
Somewhere else it said something about 30 days, that they were allowed for 30
Did,
days.
Yeah.
And that
Where
was
does it
in,
say that?
in
Oh, yeah,
045.
045.
Banners are, as defined by this chapter, are permitted for up to 30 days.
Right.
So that's, and then if they're going to go over 30 days, then they require a permit. Mhm.
Yeah, so we can add a
So
footnote
they're
that
exempt.
clarifies the time.
They're exempt for, if they're for 30 days only, yeah. I think that'd be a good way to do that, okay?
In section 085, I thought it just would be helpful to have kind of an introductory clause before the list, so something that it ties it together, like saying, for signs that are listed on table 090. And I think that just helps communicate, this isn't just, you still need to get a permit, right? But for things that you're permitted, these are the maximum sizes. On a residential district, it says 8 square feet total. I'm not sure if that means, per lot or per unit or per certain amount of
Per sign
frontage or what. Yeah, so I think we need to clarify that a little.
Probably a lot, right?
Probably, but then I'm just not sure if consideration, if anyone's thought about, well, what if it's a duplex? Do they get twice as much, or?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have the answer to that.
So if you had it per parcel, theoretically, you could have, a daycare business and one could have 4 square feet, and,
Right.
the neighbor is a accountant or something, they could have 4 square feet.
Yeah.
Okay, so per.
But I would clarify whatever the intent is there. And then on D, E, and F, they each say on a case-by basis. So I think they each need a
Oh, yeah.
case-by-case.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Another organizational comment, I thought it would make sense to have the text that's currently in 085 and 095 next to one another. So it's kind of like the physical development standards for signs.
085 and 095? Oh, I see, yeah.
Just one page, you mean, same page?
Yeah, or they don't have to be in the same section even, just have one follow the other, so that you see all of the development standards together. And then I'm almost done, I promise. For master sign program requirements in section 100, so, it says a master sign program shall be required for all multi-tenant projects. We might want to provide some clarity on when that's triggered. Is it like a new multifamily or multi-tenant project? Or if you're in an existing multi-tenant building and your one tenant wants to get a brand-new sign that's not just a change of copy, does that trigger master sign program for everyone else? It seems like it would be appropriate for that to trigger a master sign program, but I think we just want to clarify again if the intent is, anytime you get a new sign in a multi-tenant project, that you have to do a master sign program, or if it's really just intended to apply to new construction. Okay, thank you for bearing with me. I know, again, it's
Megan, I have
painful to go
a
through those.
On your question on your comments.
Sure.
This was really helpful, thank you.
Yeah, you're proposing to eliminate the table 075, or
Well,
table 1 in...
I could be convinced otherwise, but I don't think, I'm just not seeing
I
purpose for
I
it.
understand that it is redundant, except for the, let me ask about the last item in the second column, applications referred by Community Development Director. That looks like kind of an escape clause in a way, so that if something unusual comes up, then the Community Development Director can refer it to P and Z. Is that covered anywhere else if we eliminate that table?
It's not, but I think we can just put a clarifying sentence within this provision that the Community Development Director has the authority to refer applications to the
Something,
Planning
I
Commission.
don't want to lose that. If we,
Yeah, no, it's a good
I don't really necessarily have a problem eliminating that table. Might be a good idea, but we don't want to lose that if we do. Okay, great.
So, I do think there's probably enough here. I feel like I'm punting on everything, but I think there's enough kind of cleanup changes that it would be good to see this again.
Agree.
So I would move to continue this item until staff has a chance to provide a revised draft of the ordinance.
That's fine. The only thing I would ask is that we continue it to a date certain of November 13th.
Date certain?
Okay.
Yeah, the next meeting or?
That's the next meeting.
Next meeting, okay.
Okay, well, then I will move to continue this to a date certain of November 13th.
Okay, I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Moving on, we're almost done. We have one more item. No new business. Section, or item 8.
Yeah.
Announcements, communication, and discussion. We have item 8.1, housing legislation update.
Yes, I'm not going to go into great detail on this because I'm actually not that well educated yet on all the changes that have been signed and will become effective on the first of the year. But I did want to let the commission know there is a lot of housing legislation that is moving forward. Chris, Jeff, and I are going to go to a seminar in a couple weeks to learn more. It's through our external legal counsel that deals with housing issues. So.
Who's going to put that on? You said?
It's Goldfarb and Lippman.
Oh, sure.
You know
Okay,
Barb
yeah,
Kotz.
sure. Yeah.
She's often at APA conferences. She's
Land
putting
use
it on.
attorneys from, okay.
Yeah.
So they'll, okay.
Do you anticipate having a report back on some of the key legislation?
Yeah, I think once
future?
we have a better understanding, I can tell you, we will be coming back to you with an ADU ordinance in the new year, and I think we want to commence with that effort in January, just because it is rapidly changing, and we certainly have defaulted to state law with, when SB 1069 went into place. We haven't had any issues, but now there's a lot more that we're going to have to learn about. Size restrictions and other state requirements. For example, one of the things that has come out of this recent cycle is owner occupancy restrictions are no longer required. So
Sorry, what?
our code requires a deed restriction for owner occupancy of one of the units.
Yeah.
That one of the bills has effectively eliminated that. So
Okay. Interesting.
yeah, it's going to be like the sign ordinance in the sense that we're just going to tear up what we have and start fresh.
Right.
Does that mean that people with current deed restrictions could have it removed?
I mean,
Yeah, it would probably,
I'm not sure,
Must be
entirely
language.
sure.
I'll just
address it.
speculate here that it's
Yeah, yeah.
probably like if it's become, okay, for example, there used to be a lot of residential housing developments with racially restrictive covenants recorded, prohibiting people of certain ethnicities from living in that subdivision. And when the law changed to prohibit racially restrictive covenants, they basically disappear as a matter of law. So you can have it, I think there's a process you can go through to, if you have that recorded against your property, to just have it erased, essentially.
Okay.
Some deeds still have them.
Yeah. They're not legal. So we know that. Okay,
There is a lot coming.
there is. Yeah, I look forward to hearing more.
going to be interesting to see how they all kind of interplay and overlap and
Yeah, we actually, one thing we are going to do in the new year, I'm excited about this. When we did our last housing element cycle, we had a woman who, she actually doesn't live in Albany, she resides in Berkeley, but she was very passionate about housing, and she actually has a business as an ADU consultant. And she does a lot of public workshops with a team that she has to really educate homeowners on, you know, it's not just the desire to have it, you have to find a way to finance it, and you have to figure out what you can afford. And she takes on clients and really kind of sets them through the process from financing to design, permitting, and then ultimately to construction. And so we are going to be working with her in the new year to do a public workshop at the community center to again, have more
Public workshop, well,
outreach.
that's good, sounds good.
But one thing she mentioned, we had an email exchange today, and she said there's actually lawyers in Sacramento, there's some conflicting information even within the current ADU bills. And they're trying to determine which regulation is going to take precedent.
When you go to the seminar on the new housing laws, and when you think about how reporting back to us, will you pay attention to effects on the housing element and how, you know, how that could affect our housing element and the issues, you know, are we going to need an update soon, or what's going to happen there?
2021, we're going to need to commence with our update, and we already have Barry Miller, who's going to help us.
Oh, good.
Who did our
Okay,
last
good.
housing element.
Good. That's great. Okay. And then, of course, anything you see that's might require amendments to our zoning code that are coming down the pike from some of these laws would be really good. And then the ADU, there's a lot of ADU stuff, so that would be good. And then anything on transit corridor development, I know that's a big deal, and the extent that any of that has been passed, I'm not sure what's happened. AB 30 didn't pass, but some of the others might have affected that, so it'd be real good to know about. It would affect a lot of our city. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Next meeting, as we already discussed, is November 13th.
November 13th, yeah.
And with that, we are adjourned.
Okay.
okay, thank you.
Thanks.